The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Michael Harrison had been a Royal Protection Officer for 8 years. But nothing prepared him for the sound of crying coming from the west wing of Kensington Palace. He stood outside the ornate wooden doors, his hand hovering near his radio, unsure whether to intervene or retreat into the shadows where guards belong. Inside, Princess Diana's voice cracked through the silence. The words were muffled, but the pain was unmistakable. Michael had sworn an oath. Protect the royal family. Stay invisible. Never speak of what happens behind closed doors. But that night, standing in the marble hallway with moonlight streaming through tall windows, he realized he was witnessing something that would change everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and the price of silence. 3 hours earlier, Prince Charles had returned from Highgrove, his country estate. Michael had opened the car door and immediately noticed something different. The prince's jaw was tight, his eyes distant, and there was a scent perfume that didn't belong to his wife. Diana had been waiting in the drawing room. Michael had seen her through the window, pacing her blue dress, catching the lamplight. She had looked up when the car arrived, and for just a moment, Michael saw hope flicker across her face. Then it vanished, replaced by something harder, something resigned. If you're finding this story gripping, there are many more untold royal secrets on this channel. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The argument started quietly. That's what Michael remembered most. Not shouting, but the cold, controlled tone of two people who had fought this same battle 100 times before. He tried not to listen, but sound travels in old palaces. Through keyholes, under doors, along stone corridors that have kept secrets for centuries. She called again, Diana said. Her voice was steady, but Michael could hear the tremor underneath. Charles didn't answer right away. Michael heard footsteps. The clink of a glass. I asked you a question, Diana continued. I don't owe you an explanation every time the phone rings. When it's her, you do. The name was never spoken. It didn't need to be. Camilla Parker Bowles was a ghost that haunted every room of their marriage. It's more present in her absence than most people were in the flesh. Michael shifted his weight, uncomfortable. He had guarded politicians, diplomats, even foreign royalty. But this was different. This was personal. This was watching two people trapped in a fairy tale that had turned into a nightmare, and there was no door marked exit. You're being paranoid, Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Diana's laugh was bitter. Then why won't you look at me when you say that? Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Then came the sound of something breaking. Glass on marble. And finally, the crying Michael could still hear now, hours later. As he stood guard outside her door, he had seen Diana at official events. Smiling, graceful, the perfect princess. But tonight, listening to her sob in the darkness, Michael understood something the cameras never captured. Behind the tiaras and the fairy tale wedding, behind the photo calls and the cheering crowds, there was a woman drowning, and standing just a few miles away at Highgrove, there was another woman waiting by the phone. Michael checked his watch. Dawn was still hours away. It was going to be a long night, and deep down, he knew it was only the beginning of something much worse. Asterisk, by morning. The mask was back in place. Diana emerged from her private quarters at exactly 8:30. Dressed in a cream suit, her makeup flawless. If Michael hadn't spent the night listening to her cry, he would never have known anything was wrong. But he could see it in the extra moment she took before straightening her shoulders. In the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Good morning, Michael, she said softly as she passed. Good morning, Your Royal Highness. She paused, turning back to look at him. For a brief second their eyes met, and Michael saw something there. A question, maybe, or a silent plea for understanding. Then she was gone, heels clicking down the corridor toward the breakfast room where Charles was already reading the morning papers. Michael had been assigned to the royal couple for 2 years now. In that time, he had learned to read the small signs. The tension in Charles's shoulders when certain phone calls came through. The way Diana's hands trembled slightly before public appearances, the forced smiles at charity events. The separate cars, the separate schedules, the separate lives, but it was Camilla's invisible presence that poisoned everything that afternoon. Michael drove Diana to a children's hospital in South London. In the car, she was silent, staring out the window at the grey London streets. But the moment they arrived and the cameras appeared, she transformed, warm, radiant, genuinely interested in every child she met. Michael watched her kneel beside a little girl with leukemia, holding her hand, laughing at something the child said. This was the Diana the world loved. The people's princess, compassionate, real, present, if only they knew what it cost her. On the drive back, the mask slipped again. Do you think people can tell? Diana asked suddenly. When someone's pretending to be happy, Michael kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't supposed to engage in personal conversations, but something in her voice made him answer. I think people see what they want to see, ma'am. She was quiet for a moment. That's what I'm afraid of. Back at Kensington Palace, Charles was preparing to leave again. Michael watched him climb into the car, a small, overnight bag in hand. Haygrove. Again, the prince offered no explanation, and Michael asked for none. He didn't need to. That evening, Michael was posted outside the residence when he noticed movement in the gardens. Diana was walking alone, wrapped in a long coat despite the mild weather. She moved like a ghost through the manicured lawns, past the carefully trimmed hedges. To a bench hidden behind a row of rose bushes, she sat there for over an hour, completely still, just sitting. Alone, Michael had never felt more helpless in his life. His job was to protect her from external threats, from photographers, from overzealous fans, from anyone who might wish her harm. But how do you protect someone from loneliness? From a husband who would rather be anywhere else? From a rival who never had to compete because she had already won? Later that night, after Diana had gone to bed, Michael was reviewing the security logs when another protection officer, David, approached him. Rough night? David asked, pouring himself coffee. Michael nodded. David had been with the royal family longer. He had seen more. How long has it been like this? Michael asked. David took a long sip of his coffee. Since before the wedding, if you want the truth, Charles never stopped loving her. Camilla, Camilla. David set down his cup. The whole thing was doomed from the start. Diana was 19, young, naive. She thought love would be enough. But you can't compete with a ghost, Michael. And that's what Camilla is to him. Not a mistress. A soulmate who got away? And Diana? David's expression darkened. Diana is the collateral damage of a love story that started long before she entered the picture. Michael thought about the crying he'd heard the night before, about Diana sitting alone in the garden, about the way she asked if people could tell when someone was pretending. Someone should do something, Michael said. David looked at him with something close to pity. Do what? We're protection officers, not marriage counselors. Our job is to keep them safe and keep our mouths shut. That's it. But keeping quiet was becoming harder, because every day, Michael watched a woman slowly break apart. And every day, he said nothing. Asterisk. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Michael was standing outside Charles's study. He heard the prince's voice change. It softened, became intimate, the way it never sounded when he spoke to Diana. I miss you too, Charles said quietly. I know it's difficult. There was a long pause. Tomorrow evening? Yes, I'll tell them I have meetings in Gloucestershire. Michael's stomach tightened. He had heard enough of these calls to know exactly who was on the other end. And he had seen enough of Diana's pain to know what it would do to her when she found out. Because she always found out? The door opened. Charles emerged, already reaching for his coat. I'll be leaving for Highgrove in an hour, he told Michael. Prepare the car. Yes, sir. Charles paused, studying Michael's face for a moment. Is there a problem? No, sir. But there was. Michael was tired of being complicit in a lie. Tired of watching Diana try to hold together a marriage that had been broken from the start. Tired of being the silent witness to someone else's suffering an hour later. As Michael drove Charles toward Highgrove, he thought about all the times he had made this same journey. All the carefully constructed alibis, the meetings that lasted overnight, the weekend work commitments that somehow always coincided with Diana's schedule being elsewhere. They arrived at Highgrove just after sunset. The golden light cast long shadows across the estate. It was beautiful here. Peaceful. Everything Kensington Palace. WASN. Single quotes. As Charles exited the car, another vehicle was already pulling up the drive. A Land Rover. Michael didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. Camilla Parker Bowles stepped out. Even from a distance, Michael could see the way Charles's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders relaxed. His face softened. He smiled. Really smiled. The kind of smile Michael had never seen him give Diana. They didn't embrace. Not with staff present. But the way they looked at each other said everything. Michael turned away. He had seen enough. Back at Kensington Palace the next day, Diana was hosting a luncheon for a children's charity. Michael watched her work the room with practiced grace, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, asking thoughtful questions. She was magnificent at this. But Michael could see the effort it took. The way she excused herself twice to the powder room, the slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. After the guests left, Diana retreated to her private sitting room. Michael was posted outside when he heard her telephone conversation. "Where is he?" she asked someone. Her voice was tight. A pause. "Gloucestershire." Of course the words dripped with bitter sarcasm. "And I suppose he's alone." Another pause. Longer this time. "Don't lie to me. I'm not a child." Michael heard something slam. Then silence. When Diana emerged 20 minutes later, her eyes were red but dry. She had learned not to waste tears. "I need some air," she told Michael. "Would you walk with me? I don't want to be alone, but I don't want to talk either." It was an unusual request, but Michael nodded. "Of course, ma'am." They walked through the palace gardens in silence. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the path. Somewhere in the distance, London traffic humped. But here, in this small pocket of green, it was almost peaceful. Diana stopped by the fountain, watching the water cascade down the stone tiers. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she said finally. "It's not that he loves her. I've known that for years. It's that he can't even pretend. He can't give me even that small dignity." Michael didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "Everyone thinks I'm lucky," Diana continued. "A princess. Living in a palace. Married to the future king. They see the tiaras and the gowns and think I have everything." She turned to look at him, and Michael was struck by how young she looked. "How sad, but you can't eat in a golden cage, Michael? No matter how beautiful it is." That night, Charles returned from Highgrove. Michael opened the car door and caught that same scent again, the perfume that didn't belong. Charles walked past Diana without a word. She stood in the entrance hall, watching him go, and Michael saw something shift in her expression. Not anger, not sadness. Something harder. More determined. She was done pretending to. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in June. Michael had just started his shift when he heard shouting. Not the controlled, icy arguments he had grown accustomed to, but real shouting. Raw, unfiltered. Years of pain finally exploding into the open. "I found them." Diana's voice rang through the corridor. "The letters. All of them. Hidden in your study like some pathetic teenager?" Michael moved closer to the door, instinct overriding protocol. If things turned physical, he needed to be ready. "You had no right to go through my private things," Charles shot back. "Private?" Diana's laugh was sharp, cutting. "We're married, Charles. Or have you forgotten?" Because she certainly hasn't. "My darling, I dream of you. Soon we'll be together. Should I read more, or have you heard enough?" The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you want me to say?" Charles finally asked, and his voice was tired. Defeated. "I want you to say you'll stop. I want you to choose your family. Choose me. Just once, Charles. Just once. Choose me over her." Another pause. And then the words that would haunt Michael for years to come. I can't." The sound that came from Diana wasn't quite a scream. It was deeper than that. More primal. The sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. Michael heard footsteps. Fast. Then the door flew open, and Diana ran past him, tears streaming down her face. She didn't seem to see him at all. She was blind with pain, running on pure instinct, desperate to escape. "Ma'am," Michael started, but she was already gone. Charles appeared in the doorway moments later. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. "Let her go," he said quietly. "She needs space." But Michael couldn't let her go. Not like this. He followed at a discreet distance as Diana ran through the palace. Through the gardens, to the small gate that led to the private park. She collapsed on a bench, her whole body shaking with sobs. Michael stood at a respectful distance. Torn between his duty to give her privacy and his duty to keep her safe, in the end, he chose to stay. Because sometimes protection isn't just about physical safety. Sometimes it's about bearing witness. About not letting someone suffer completely alone. Diana cried for 20 minutes. Then, slowly, she pulled herself together. She straightened her back, wiped her eyes, took deep breaths until her hands stopped shaking. When she finally stood and turned around, she saw Michael standing there. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Long enough, ma'am." She studied his face for a moment. "You heard everything, didn't you?" "Last night." "This morning?" "All of it." Michael nodded. There was no point lying. "Then you know," she said softly. "You know that my marriage is a sham. That I'm married to a man who loves someone else. That I'm the spare part in someone else's love story." "I know you deserve better," Michael said, breaking every protocol he'd ever been taught. Diana's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. "Do I? Sometimes I wonder if I brought this on myself. If I was too young, too naive, too desperate to be loved." "You were 19, Michael said gently. "And none of this is your fault." She smiled sadly. "Thank you for saying that, even if it's not true." Over the following weeks, something shifted in Diana. The crying stopped. The fragility was replaced by something harder, more calculating. She began keeping her own secrets, taking her own phone calls. Leaving the palace without explanation, Michael noticed other changes too. Diana started paying more attention to her appearance. More fashionable clothes, a new hairstyle. She seemed to be reclaiming something, building armor. Meanwhile, Charles's trips to Highgrove became more frequent, more brazen. He stopped bothering with excuses. The pretense was over. The marriage had become nothing more than a public facade. One evening, Michael overheard Diana on the phone with someone. Her voice was different, lighter, almost happy. "Tomorrow at 8, she said. "Yes, I'm sure. He'll be in Scotland. He won't know." Michael felt his stomach drop. He had watched Charles betray Diana countless times, and now she was crossing the same line. He couldn't judge her. How could he? She had spent years being faithful to a man who gave his heart to someone else. She had played by the rules while everyone around her broke them. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe this was survival, but Michael knew what it meant. The marriage wasn't just broken anymore. It was over. And soon, the whole world would know. The tabloids got the story 3 months later. Michael was off duty when the first headlines hit. Photos of Charles and Camilla, grainy, stolen, but unmistakable. The affair that everyone suspected but no one could prove was now splashed across every newspaper in the country. The palace went into crisis mode. Emergency meetings, carefully worded statements, damage control. But the damage was done. Michael returned to work the next day to find Kensington Palace under siege. Photographers lined the gates. Reporters shouted questions at every car that entered or left. The fairy tale was over. The world was watching it burn inside. Diana was eerily calm. She held a press conference, her voice steady, her eyes clear. She didn't attack Charles. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Instead, she talked about her charity work. Her children? Her hope for the future? She was grace under pressure, and the public loved her even more for it. But Michael saw what the cameras didn't. The way her hands gripped the podium just a little too tight. The slight pause before she smiled. The exhaustion in her eyes when she thought no one was looking that night. After the press had finally left, Diana sat alone in her study. Michael was posted outside when he heard her voice. "Come in, Michael." He opened the door, surprised. She was sitting by the window, a glass of wine in her hand, staring out at the dark gardens. "How did you know I was here?" he asked. "I always know when you're there," she said softly. "You're one of the few people I trust anymore." Michael didn't know what to say to that. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please. I need to talk to someone who actually knows what happened. Who saw it all?" Michael hesitated, then sat. This was completely against protocol. But protocol seemed meaningless now. "Do you think I'm a victim?" Diana asked suddenly. "Is that how people see me? Poor, pathetic Diana, abandoned by her husband?" "I think people see your strength," Michael said carefully. "Your dignity." Diana laughed bitterly. "Dignity. That's a kind word for survival." She took a sip of wine. "Do you want to know the truth, Michael? The real truth that no one talks about? If you want to tell me." "I knew," she said. "Before the wedding, I knew about Camilla. Friends warned me. I saw them together at events. I heard the way he talked about her. But I was 19 and in love with the idea of being a princess. I thought I could make him love me. I thought love was enough to overcome anything." She turned to look at him. "I was wrong. You can't blame yourself for that, can't I?" Diana set down her wine glass. "I walked into this marriage with my eyes half open. I chose to believe the fairy tale instead of the truth. And now my children are paying the price." Michael thought about William and Harry, the young princes who were caught in the middle of their parents' war, who smiled for the cameras but surely felt the tension at home. "Your children love you," Michael said. "Anyone can see that." "I know. And that's the only thing that keeps me going some days." Diana stood and walked to the window. "Do you know what the hardest part is? It's not that he chose her. It's that he never chose me. Not once in our entire marriage. I was the obligation, the duty. The woman he had to marry for the crown. But Camilla was the woman he loved. And you can't compete with that." "No," Michael agreed quietly. "You can't." Diana pressed her hand against the window glass. "I used to think that if I was prettier, smarter, more interesting, he might love me. I tried everything. I studied his interests. I supported his causes. I gave him 2 sons. But nothing was ever enough. Because I wasn't her." "That's not your failure," Michael said firmly. "That's his." Diana smiled sadly. "Maybe, but it doesn't change anything. The marriage is over. We both know it. The palace knows it. Soon the whole world will know it officially." She turned back to face him. "I'm going to ask for a separation." Michael felt his chest tighten. He had known it was coming, but hearing her say it made it real. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Diana said. "I've spent years in a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage. But a cage nonetheless. It's time to be free." Asterisk, the official separation was announced 3 weeks later. Michael stood in the background as the palace. Spokesperson read the carefully worded statement. The Prince and Princess of Wales had decided to separate. They would continue to carry out their royal duties. The decision was made amicably. All the proper words were there, polished and diplomatic. But Michael knew the truth. There was nothing amicable about the slow destruction of a marriage. Nothing diplomatic about years of loneliness, betrayal, and heartbreak. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some blamed Charles for his infidelity. Others blamed Diana for not being enough. Most blamed Camilla for being the other woman who refused to go away. But everyone had an opinion about a marriage they had never truly understood. Michael's last official duty with Diana came on a cold December morning. She was leaving Kensington Palace for a private residence. Starting her new life? Her new freedom. He helped carry boxes to the car, watching her move through the rooms one last time. She paused in the entrance hall, the same place where she had waited for Charles so many nights, where she had hoped and hurt and finally given up hoping. "Oh, this place holds a lot of ghosts," she said quietly. "Maybe your new home will have fewer," Michael offered. Diana smiled. A real smile this time. Small, but genuine. "That's the plan." As they loaded the last box, Diana turned to him. "Thank you, Michael. For everything. For the nights you pretended not to hear me crying. For the times you followed me to make sure I was safe. For treating me like a human being instead of just a princess." "It was an honor, ma'am." "Diana," she corrected gently. "After everything you've seen, I think you've earned the right to call me Diana." Michael nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Take care of yourself, Diana. I intend to." She climbed into the car, and Michael watched it drive away. A chapter was ending. For her, for Charles. For everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of a love triangle that should never have existed. 3 years later, Michael was home with his family when the news broke. Diana, dead. A car crash in Paris. The woman he had guarded, whose tears he had heard, whose strength he had witnessed, was gone. He sat in his living room, numb, as the television showed endless footage of her life. The wedding, the charity work, the boys, the separation, the divorce. And yes, Camilla. Always Camilla. The shadow that had darkened every moment of Diana's marriage. Michael thought about the young woman he had met 8 years ago. Desperate to be loved. Desperate to make a failing marriage work. Desperate to find her place in a world that had no space for her authenticity. And he thought about Charles, who had loved the wrong woman at the wrong time and destroyed everyone in the process, including himself. Years passed. Charles eventually married Camilla. The scandal faded. The public moved on. But Michael never forgot. He never forgot the sound of Diana crying through palace doors, the way she held herself together in public while falling apart in private, the morning she finally chose freedom over a beautiful lie, and he never forgot the truth that everyone had tried to ignore. You can't force someone to love you. You can't compete with a ghost. And you can't build a marriage on duty alone. Camilla's presence hadn't just affected Charles and Diana's marriage. It had defined it. From the engagement to the bitter end, she had been there. The third person in a relationship that was only meant for two. The woman Charles loved, but couldn't have until he destroyed the woman he married, but didn't love, some people said.
Oh.
Charles was weak. Others said Diana was paranoid. Many said Camilla was a homewrecker, but Michael knew the truth. It was more complicated than headlines and public opinion. The truth was that 3 people were trapped in an impossible situation. One bound by duty, one bound by hope, one bound by a love that society said was wrong, and in the end, everyone lost something. Michael retired from royal protection 5 years after Diana's death. He moved to the countryside, far from palaces and protocols. But even now, decades later, sometimes wakes in the night and thinks he hears crying through walls that no longer exist. The story of Charles, Diana and Camilla, is often told as a scandalous affair, a betrayal, a failure. But Michael knew it was simpler and sadder than that. It was a story about 3 people who wanted to be happy and didn't know how, about a system that valued appearances over truth, about a young woman who deserved better and a man who could never give it to her, and about love, the wrong kind. At the wrong time, with devastating consequences, the world remembers Diana as the people's princess. Beautiful, charitable, tragic, and she was all those things. But Michael remembers her differently. He remembers a woman who fought harder than anyone knew to save a marriage that was already lost, who found strength in the ruins of her fairy tale, who chose herself when everyone else chose the crown. That's the Diana he carries with him, not the princess in the photos, but the human being behind the tiara, the woman who cried and laughed and hoped and hurt, the woman who deserved the love she never received, and somewhere in a palace or an estate, he knows there's another protection officer standing outside another door, listening to another private pain, keeping another secret that will shape history, Because that's what they do. They watch. They witness. They stay silent. Until one day, they don't.